All right, you guys, so we're going to be looking at domain and range. And so for this first video, we're going to focus on domain, okay, just domain, and then I'll come back in another video and I'll talk about range. Okay, so if you watch the previous video, you should have an understanding that domain, okay, is referring to or it is working with my x values, okay? So this is what we're looking at today. So when I'm looking at my x values, that means I'm going to be focused on the x-axis, okay? So that's where I'm getting my answers from, okay? I'm getting my answers from the x-axis, okay? All right, so if I look here at my Delta Math picture that I have here, okay, we've been asked to determine the domain of the following graph. So that means I need to figure out all of the x values that are associated with this graph, okay? Well, this blue line, okay, tells me, okay, where my x values start, okay? So if I look straight down here, okay, my x values start at -8. All right, so I'm going to make a note of that. I start at -8, okay? And then if I follow along this graph, okay, that means all the numbers in between -8 and -7, -7 and -6, I would have to write down all of these numbers, okay? And I don't want to do that, okay? So I'm going to go over here. I'm just going to follow it. I'm going to follow it. I'm going to follow it. I'm going to follow it. And it stops, okay? And my x values, they stop, okay, at 9. All right, so my graph is associated with x values in between, okay, every number that exists between -8 and +9, okay? So if I were to put that on a number line, so -8 to 9, everything in between, okay, my graph is associated with it. So if I were to say, hey, what happens when the graph is -6? You would say, okay, I'm going to go here to -6, and then I'd look up here and I'd try to determine what the value is. Okay, so everywhere I go on the x-axis, I can go, if I'm, as long as I'm between -8 and 9, if I say, hey, what happens at 2? You can go up and say, oh, it's about 3.5. If I say, hey, what's happening at 4.5? You could go to 4.5 and you go up and you would say the answer is maybe 6. Okay. So everywhere in between. Well, I don't want to write down all of the x values. Like even if I wanted to make a table and say, okay, here's my x, here's my y, here's my domain. Okay, so I would start at -8 and then -7, -6, and I would just keep going. Okay, so how can I do this easily? How can I tell you, or how can you tell me all of the x values between -8 and -9 in a shorthand presentation? Okay, all right, so it's really easy. You have these parentheses and brackets down here. Okay, all right, here's how you use them. So if you don't write anything down but this, okay, you've got the brackets. Okay, you've got the parentheses, but then you have combinations of in between, and that's okay. The brackets are used when you have solid dots. Okay, so see how there's a solid dot right here? Okay, you would use the parentheses if you had open dots. Okay, and why do we do that? Okay, if it's solid, it's inclusive. Okay, meaning you include it, meaning -8 is included in the domain. Okay, if there's an open dot, okay, that's because it's exclusive, meaning there's a hole, meaning there is no value associated with it. Okay, but I still get a starting point. You're going to see that in the very next example, because I'll make sure that the next example I do has an open circle here. Okay, so since they are both circles, okay, I'm going to use these brackets, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the starting value and the stop value from left to right. So my starting value is -8 and then 9. So -8 is my start value to 9. Okay, and what you've done is what's called interval notation. Okay, that's all it is. You're telling me from the interval from -8 to 9, and everything in between would be in the list of my domain. Okay, submit my answer. Yes, green check. Okay, you can see here how he shaded it. And then look what he says, domain on the x-axis. Okay, the minimum or the starting point is -8. It had a closed circle, you use a bracket. Because the stopping point or the max, okay, is 9. It has a closed circle, you use another bracket. Okay, don't worry about the alternate notation. Okay, all right, so let's do another problem. Okay, so now we've got open circles. Okay. All right, now I'm going to leave this all right here because I actually really don't need this anymore. I don't need to write this down anymore, okay? You might need this little piece right here, okay? If you got a solid dot, you should use brackets. If you have an open dot, you should use parentheses. All right, I have an open dot at each end. So I find the one with parentheses. Okay, this is how easy it is. Tell me where the graph starts on the x-axis. -11. Tell me where the graph stops on the x-axis. 4. That is the domain. There it is. Okay. All right. So let's do a similar problem. Okay, perfect. So now here we got one of each. Okay. I've got one of each. So that means I got to pick the one that matches here. Okay. So since I have an open dot at my starting point, I need a parentheses on the left. And then I have a closed dot here, so I need a bracket on the right. So that's all it was. So open dot was on the left, closed dot was on the right. Okay, so now I'm just going to put in my starting point and my stop point. Okay, my graph starts at -7. So -7. Okay, I follow my graph. It stops where? At x equals 4. Okay, and then making sure you pick the correct parentheses and brackets based on if you have an open circle or a closed circle. Submit my answer. There it is. And look what it says. -7, we had an open circle, use parentheses. We stopped at 4. We had a closed circle, so we have to use a bracket. That's it. That's how you tell me the domain. Okay, because you're telling me that if I were to make a table, okay, if I was to try to make a table, my table should start at -7, should start at -7 in this case, and all the numbers in between -7, and my table would stop at 4. And I could write down all the different values for the points. Okay? All right, so that's how you're going to find domain. I'll come back in another video to do range.